Hey everyone, I just interviewed Ella last week. She's a PhD candidate in computer science at Clemson University. She reached out to me a few weeks ago and asked if I could assist her with her research, which has to do largely with live streaming software development. I have been live streaming my own software development for years, so I said sure, but I also asked her if she'd like to be on this interview, and she said sure, which is why we're here making this video. We mostly talked about her research. We also talked a little bit about her journey leading up to that and what she'll do after it when she is Dr. Ella. And then she asked me to reserve some time toward the end of the interview so that she could ask me some questions. So there's about 10 minutes of a reverse interview at the end of that. I hope you enjoy. Thank you very much for watching. We're here for an interview. This is Ella. She is a computer science PhD candidate at Clemson University. I wanted to talk about your research, but I first wanted to start by talking about you a little bit more. So let's start with what got you into computers in the first place.
So I've had the privilege of just having computers, video games, video consoles like around me like my whole life.
Mhm.
My parents actually bought themselves SNESes for Christmas one year, and they didn't know they had gotten each other that game console.
Yeah.
So it really started with video games, and then we always had a home PC. My grandparents had a computer at home. They're the ones that mostly look after me, like especially since my parents are working and when I wasn't at school, I hogged the computer all day long. And yeah, so it was just yeah, it was they were just always there, So it was something that was ever present. I always enjoyed it. I picked it up really easily, things like that.
Yeah, I think it's good to be immersed in it. When did you first start programming?
I actually didn't start programming until college.
Okay. Starting with
Um,
a formal education then, yeah.
yeah, so I wouldn't consider the like 2 lines of HTML that I did on like my Neopets page to make my text pink or whatever, and like my guild. I did because I didn't understand what it was. I was like, oh, I can make things pink. Here we go. Copy this and paste it into the you know text editor. I didn't understand that was programming at the time,
Yeah, and
but
yet
yeah.
that's accessible for a lot of people. And actually I find that truer and truer today, and maybe we'll talk about this, which is that games are a great intro for programming because people are motivated to play games already, and they're
Yeah.
motivated to make these changes that they want to make either through mods or through, like you said, a Neopets page turning a different color. I want to advance the timeline a bit now. So Ella shared her background with me for those in chat. And in 2017, I believe you got your CS undergraduate degree. Now, we know now that you're a PhD candidate, and yet there were 2 years where you went to be an intern followed by a full-time employee in cybersecurity. What steered you away from doing a postgraduate degree at first?
I was done. I was so done with school. I didn't want to learn anymore. I was, it took me in college. Like I finally found like a really good friend group, and then when you graduate, you all go different places, right? Everyone splits to different sides of the country, and it's just like, why would I want to go back and have to redo this? Um, and I was ready to just hustle. I was ready to make money. I was ready to live on my own. I wanted to move out of my mom's house. I wanted to buy a car, typical 22-year-old with aspirations of possessions.
Yeah,
Um,
well, and like I said, we know that you ended up back in the academic world, and you did tell me a little bit about this. I assume it was the beginning of 2019 where you had your words, a bad mentor, or bad mentoring at least, that said you need grad school in order to succeed. Are you happy with that fork in your life? You ended up going to grad school, but if you hadn't, would you have still been in cybersecurity?
I don't think I still would have been in the same position. Um, I really don't know because like it ended up being at the time of like, oh, you have to go and get your graduate degree. Like you're never gonna make money. You may not go up for promotions. And I was like, to me, that didn't quite mesh with the worldview that I had.
Hmm.
Because I was, I'm gonna use the word tenured um, in my position with the government. I had had time and grade, like pretty much, I'd have to commit a crime to be, fired. Which isn't something that I was a hard worker. I like being challenged and things like that. So it was kind of a a divisive thing within myself. I was always told, work hard, you'll get the things you want. You put in the effort, you reap what you sow, and things like that. And I was like, well, why do I need a piece of paper to show that I'm working hard and then also have to work basically doubly hard outside of work? It doesn't quite make sense to me
Well,
at the time.
okay, again, I feel like we now know you're about to get your PhD and actually spring of 2025. But back then, did you sort of cross-reference that advice with other people and see what they think? Did you have people you trusted in the industry to sort of know whether that was good advice or not?
So that's what was surprising is, where I was positioned, a lot of the people there didn't even have a bachelor's degree.
Mm.
They were people they have been working for 10, 15, 20 years. They're all my parents' age. I'm the age of their child. So they were like, well, yeah, my kids are going to college. My kids are going to grad school. I didn't. And I really didn't have anyone who's like in my family. I may be the second person to go to grad school. And it's like my dad only has an associate's. My mom got her bachelor's when I was, I think, just after I was born. So we're not. What's the word? There's like a word for. I'm kind of a first generation graduate student in my family. Is that the right way to put that?
Yeah. I
So
see
I
what you're
really
saying.
didn't have that familial kind of information or just people to turn to because almost everyone I knew just went to work. Like they went into industry, they got jobs at Fangs, they took their internship and converted it to full time. So they're like, ooh, grad school, not for me.
Well,
So
okay. So two more things, and I do want to eventually get to your research here. You mentioned
yeah.
when I asked, okay, 2017, why didn't you go to postgrad? You said I was done. 2 years later, well, maybe two and a half, three, you were in grad school. Did you feel like, oh man, I was done. I'm dragging myself back here.
Yes. So kind of in that same time period, I was actually splitting my time at work with my cybersecurity team and in the research and development division. I had an excellent mentor over there,
Hmm.
and he's like, "What you're doing is peanuts. If you are not enjoying yourself and you aren't having fun, come over here and do really hard things and explore things that you've never done." I was like, I work with formally verifiable languages. I didn't think I'd ever do that, but it was really cool and the applications were fun. And then he got a better job, which good for him. And he's like, "All right, peace." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So he left a lot of his research to me, but I didn't have a graduate degree. And so I was like, "Okay, I'll go get my master's and I'll try and keep resubmitting for funding for the things that he gave me." None of them got refunded. And I don't necessarily think it was because of my like education status because
Hmm.
it was just continuing research that was already you know kind of laid out, kind of in progress. And so I kind of was in flux at work. I was having to bounce around team to team to try to not go and back full time to the cybersecurity stuff because it was a dumpster fire. So I decided to go and get my like a part-time master's because my kind of bad mentor at the time was like, yeah, like the government will pay for it. And I went and looked at the contract. I was like, if I do this at the timeline and pace that I want to, I'm going to owe service back longer than I ever want to work.
Yeah.
It was something like 5 times the amount of time you're in school back in service. And they've since changed that, which is
Yep.
very nice, and they've actually included it in the PhD now. So a bunch of my old coworkers I see on campus now, which is fun. But yeah, so I kind of just to like circle back around. I didn't really expect to be there, but I was trying to use it as a safety net,
Yeah.
basically, of like if I gotta go, and if this guy is telling me I actually need a master's, any form of graduate degree, I'll have one.
Yeah. I feel like sort of in a maybe a little bit larger sense here, we all live our lives according to lots of different motivations, your own motivations, other people's, and your motivations were very much get out of the academic world in 2017 and then became, hey, your fantastic mentor really influenced you to join And unfortunately, they left. But it sounds like there was still a fire in you at that point where you thought, I believe in this. I like this. Maybe I believe the whole what you're doing is peanuts thing. So, okay, I want to shift into your research, but I want to make a comment before that I wonder how much of your path led to influencing your research, and not just you mentioned that there was this fantastic mentor who had started things and you wanted funding for those projects. But a lot of what you're doing is what I would call almost non-traditional computer science. It's either what are different aspects of influencing education or live streaming, which is certainly non-traditional. So let's break down. You have, I think, three parts of your research. There was software development communities, live streaming and software development, and then informal approaches to education. So how about we start with the communities? What are the sorts of communities that you're talking about when you talk about these communities?
Yeah, so communities that stem from live streaming. So Discord, subreddits, even Stack Overflow to a certain degree are all communities. I've actually tried to interface a little bit with like in-person communities. So we have like all those online spaces, and then we have our in-person spaces. In-person spaces are a little bit few and far between, at least where I am. They call us Silicon Harbor, but there isn't that big of a tech space here
Yeah.
yet. Um, and I was really interested in these communities because, and it's going to sound a little strange, but as a woman in tech, just in STEM in general, you're always kind of put in this box that these communities are going to be stinky, sweaty places where no one wants to help you. And I think 20 years ago, no one knows you're a dog on the internet, but I think they may have been a little bit more inclusive than
Hmm.
they are now. And I just always thought I couldn't get over that dichotomy of like I was always told these spaces were, kind of awful places to be, but if you actually spend more than 2 minutes looking at something and you can try to fit your way in there, they're fantastic resources for everyone, from novices to established, software developers and software engineers.
Yeah, I want to go back one tiny step here because maybe I misheard. Did you say they were more inclusive 20 years ago because it was purely online?
I said I was meaning like less
Oh,
inclusive,
less
like
inclusive. Okay.
more of a like I don't want to call it a boys club, but like if someone strange shows up in your local game store, like what are you doing here? I hadn't seen you here before, and you can kind of feel a little, I don't know, singled out in a
Yeah,
way.
yeah, yeah. That exclusivity, I feel, has been a focus for a lot of companies at the very least in the last, honestly, maybe like 5-ish years. I think they'd
Mhm.
always sort of said it, but there wasn't really action behind those words. And now I feel like a lot of companies are saying, hey, we have programs about diversity, about inclusion, and making sure that employees are empowered to do that. And I'm guessing this actually probably stemmed from even earlier in the pipeline of, hey, in universities, let's also try to be inclusive and let's make sure that everyone can have a voice. And I think it's great. I'm also glad to hear that you reported as a woman in tech that it's not as standoffish as it might have seemed originally, because I have interviewed other women in tech, and I think largely the sentiment is better than I would have thought it would be. So that's really good news.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely think that within the past 5 years, things have really, taken her. I think I don't know the actual stats, but I know that even though it's not like equitable,
Hmm.
women in STEM and tech are continuing to increase little by little bit.
Yeah.
From what was a women dominated field in the 50s and 60s
Yeah.
did a whole, flip, and so we're slowly like kind of making our way back up there.
Yeah. And I don't think, well, maybe people know about this, but yes, that it started with largely women in tech. Women were the programmers, the people who were coding into these mainframe computers, and somehow that all got flipped, and now it's hopefully getting back to a little bit more equitable, as you say. Going back to communities, so you mentioned Discord, subreddits. How do people find each other? How do they join these communities?
Great question. A lot of it. So I've done a small survey. It ended up being a really small sample size because, again, as a researcher and you're coming to these communities, I reached out to you, and I try to reach out to moderators before I just start posting, right? No one wants to have their space invaded.
Hmm.
So it can actually be kind of hard to kind of get that kind of data unless you're already in those communities. And I can't participate in every single development community, right?
Yeah.
Um, but it ended up being a lot of word of mouth. Like, oh, my friend says that like this community is really cool. You should go check them out. It ended up stemming from like Google searches. Like, I have a problem, and I have absolutely no idea what's happened. And then you end up at the Godot subreddit. You end up on the Python subreddit. You end up on coding for beginners, Rust, Ruby, and you kind of can start to see the impact and influence these communities may have when you have questions and you're starting to learn. And then if you stay in them, people often end up uh, they'll go from being that person who lurks and only uses the community as information only to start being like, well, actually, I ran into this. Did you try this? And then they grow even a little bit more. They might even take on a mentorship role and be like, hey, I think you may be approaching this the wrong way. Let me help you. Here's what I did. Here's what you can try. And you start pointing to all these other resources. So you can end up growing in these communities. But yeah, so, like word of mouth, finding through searches, and then some people just found them randomly. There was a couple people, especially with Discord, like Discord communities, they were just scrolling through the list and were like, "This one looks interesting," and it ended up being really relevant for them.
Yeah, I find the same sort of thing happen here on the randomness aspect, which is people on Twitch get dumped from stream to stream through the rating system and what used to be the hosting system. And some people would say, I would never have sought out this content, but now that I'm here, it's either relaxing or it's nice or I'm productive when I'm here. And I always wondered, how could you sort of exploit is the wrong word, but take advantage of that effect and dump more people into this and see, hey, do you like this or how else would you have found it? Um, I want to, this question just popped up in my head. Have you looked into communities like Blind? Have you heard of Blind?
No, what's up?
Okay, so my understanding, I'm not actually in any of these communities, but it's a site for employees of companies. And to join, you need to have proven that you have a, at Amazon address or an at Google address. And my other understanding is that they're typically negative about these companies and about the industry at large, and it's anonymous, so they post their gripes with whatever's going on. Anyway, if you haven't looked into that, then I'll forego questions there. But open source, is open source another one of these communities that you look at?
So I open source. I've actually kind of tried to look at it, like not look at open source. Right, there's so much information and so much research already on open source
Mm,
projects, and that tends to be a little bit more, from what I've seen, structured, um, and a little bit more formal.
yeah.
They are still informal communities, but I've tried to make a hard line between open source and this, because the things that I'm interested in aren't necessarily one single project, right?
Yeah, I
Um,
see. Okay, that
yeah,
makes
so
sense.
it's ended up being like kind of a point of contention within trying to get like published. They're like, well, what about OSS? And I'm like, I'm not really looking at that. It's similar, but it's actually not relevant to the things that I look at. So it's been
Yeah.
a yeah.
Are you a follower of XKCD at all, or even occasionally?
Yeah,
Yeah.
oh yeah.
There's one of the comics that he's done, which was like a circle of all human knowledge, and that each PhD pushes that circle out just a tiny bit. So I feel like if you are focusing on open source after talking to whomever it is, advisors or whoever's trying to get you to publish, that they're not getting that whole, I'm trying to bump out this pixel of the circle and not this pixel. So how are these communities influencing software at large?
At large, so it goes back to these people who end up being these I don't have a great word for them, but like the people who end up forming the pillars of the community, right? You can have I haven't I feel like I don't there was one community that I'd seen like where people had like come together and been like, hey, we don't like these changes. I guess like Unity is like one that's kind of on my head right
Yeah.
now, because I just watched a loading ready run on Unity. Just brought back their runtimes. They went away with it, but they actually took it way further than it needed to. But people within like the Unity community and those higher ups, those people with influence, they can actually make they can people with influence can then influence, you know, things at large. They can say like, hey, why are we going in this direction? We should be going in this direction. And I think it ends up, at least in communities right now, that big topic's AI.
Hmm.
And kind of like, what's the right way I'm trying to go with this? I feel like I'm squirreling a little bit, but it ends up they end up being more powerful places
Yeah,
that have, you know, influence and sway within uh, an interest at large.
I see what you're saying. And I see this happen in the content creation space as well, where people are sometimes just called influencers. But I think it used to be that, hey, here are people's YouTube channels. Sure, they're getting 1 million views or 2 million views on videos, but that's not really like advertising, traditional advertising. And now there are YouTubers who are invited to Apple exclusive events where they say, this is how we're going to get the word out there, because that's where the eyes are. That's where people are watching. So it makes sense that this is also happening with software communities, which is you get enough Unity developers together, they're going to have a voice and they get amplified by these mainstays, these pillars of the community. So it's interesting to see this develop and sort of develop around us. It's not like this has been a thing for 50 years. So pretty cool.
Exactly.
One thing I want to take a tiny detour here, as long as we're on the topic of communities. You mentioned that you had a paper published, I believe, on engaging communities. I was curious for the lay people out there, what are sort of the top takeaways of if you wanted to engage a community, how do you do it?
Yeah, the first place to start is actually read the community's rules. You know, if they say no soliciting, that means no soliciting. Don't ask. It they'll be mean. If they don't have it listed, and you know, approach moderators, approach a mod mailbox, and just explain, you know, who you are, why you're approaching them, why you want their data, and what you're going to do with it. And you can try to be as open and honest as you can without like compromising or influencing potential responses. Um, because it really does just suck. Like c- communities don't want to be looked at necessarily. They're not fish bowls, right? That's not the point of them. And as a researcher, you have to respect that. If people don't want to be researched, they don't want to be researched. But on the flip side, you know, the things that you want to research and the things that come out of it could actually benefit these communities. Um, so you have to try to like be like you try and carrot and stick them, uh, and it works out sometimes. I'd say about 50% of the time it works every time.
Yeah.
It's hard to make yourself vulnerable because some people will come back and say like, you suck. I've gotten within there's some quotes in the paper from some subreddits moderators who say awful and unkind things, and
And
it's just like, I didn't need that.
I this aspect of anonymity, I think, is incredibly insidious because when you see someone face to face and you're looking them in the eyes, you can see the sort of micro reactions on their face as you're saying something to them, and then change course as you're saying it. But this asynchronous communication, first of all, you're not in front of someone. I actually wonder if this is a random side note, if they've done research on I'm typing to you while looking you in the face, does that increase empathy at all?
Ooh.
So anyway, interesting thought. But yeah, when these people are just behind their keyboards and they've painted you to be whatever almost caricature of what you might be in their head, and then they sort of attack that straw man and say, no, get out of here, you're just using this. I think that can be a challenging barrier to overcome. On my flip side of this, as someone who's running a community, I have had people come in and sort of violate all of the rules. And it is frustrating sometimes because I like being helpful. And the very nature of streaming is people come in and ask me questions from very basic things like what language should I learn to very advanced things like, hey, I have this library, and I have a bug. What do I do about it? And I've given people my time who are total strangers. And sometimes they sort of get this expectation that I'm going to forever give them my time for free. And it's tough. And there are all these parasocial relationships that happen with streaming anyway that make it difficult for me to navigate that as the person with the community. So anyway, long story short, I appreciate the way that you engaged this community and it led to this interview. So clearly we're all happy.
Yeah, I mean, I was about to say, like, if there's a way I could have better engaged, let me know. I'm here to improve whatever I need to, because at the end of the day, I don't ever want to hurt anyone's feelings, or come off as like, give me your data, or else. That's not that's not
Yeah,
me.
I
And
think my
if
only
you
tip would be fewer gun emojis in your opening email next time. I'm
hold
kidding.
I'm holding you hostage.
Yeah, I'm holding you hostage. I want your data. I think the way you did it was really good. I think the other thing is a personal growth on my end is that I've been streaming for the last roughly a decade. And at the beginning, I was very sort of closed off to those sorts of suggestions. And over time, I thought I should at least hear what the person has to say, even if I'm not open to it. And a lot of the ways that plays out is with sponsorships where I'm like, this is not a good fit. I don't want to do that. But that's very much a transactional relationship. This is, I feel like, helps research. Um, I want to continue with the research, by the way, for a second. So
Yeah.
we talked about communities in software development. The second part, and this is in my mind the largest part that I wanted to focus on, is live streaming in software development. So what are some of the topics you've covered there? And I recognize this could be very expansive. So yeah,
Yeah.
give us an intro.
So research into live streaming is starting to become more popular. A lot of it is on gaming, right? Twitch's popularity, YouTube's popularity all started off with gaming. Social relationships, the behaviors associated with this sort of live, sort of asynchronous kind of deal, and it ends up being more uh, on the social end of things, and not necessarily educational side. And I have absolutely no idea how I ended up in the software and game development. Actually, it was the science and technology
Yeah.
category before y'all were able, like, give us our own category. I don't want to be next to chickens anymore. Um, like live streams of chicken coops, which was kind of fun. It was like, oh, ooh, Rust, chickens,
Yep. Yep.
aquariums. Um, and I actually don't remember how I got there. And I was like, oh, why would someone want to watch someone code? That's weird. And then I did it, and I was like, oh, this is fun. You're like seeing how the sauce is made. You have a peek behind the curtain. And I was like, well, this is cool. I wish that I had, in my mind, what this was an actual fountain of mentors that I could pick from.
Yeah.
Right? I was like, if I had this in high school, maybe I would have started coding before then. Maybe I would be a stronger coder now if I had been able to just go and find someone who was doing something that I had been interested in, and things like that. Uh, and what was the rest of the question?
Oh
I'm
no.
getting
So
off.
no,
Yeah,
that's good. It was mostly like, what have you uncovered so far? But what you're talking
right.
about, at least what I'm hearing here, is it was a nice surprise to stumble upon this, and it lowers the barrier for entry. It made it more accessible and allows you to ask questions, allows other people to ask questions, and probably triggered a spark in your brain of where could this go?
Yes, and so I guess so that, and then kind of like what I've seen there is just things that I've personally seen as a viewer, and that's kind of what my next paper is. What I've really focused on, kind of that first question of like, why do you do this? Like, it's kind of weird, right? Like, I get you want people who are playing games, like, oh, look at me, I'm an elite gamer, I can go on a 212 KD and one trick mercy. I don't know. I was like, but like, why does someone want to stream themselves doing their day job? And so that's where I started off with. And the things that I found are, they're kind of along the same ideas. They're accountability
Mhm.
for themselves. Like, uh, they couldn't, not they, I was like, they couldn't. That sounds very, well, they were bad people. No. It was just a way to set aside time
Yeah.
for yourself, for you to do a thing that you need to do. There's the social aspect of it. It was just like, I was working at home and it was COVID and I was lonely, and I started to just do my job live, and people came in and I could talk to people, and I found friends, and I found a community. I've built this community. Um, and then, like, it was also just people wanted to advertise what they were doing,
Yep.
you're doing it. You're building your own game. You're using it as you're both an education and a, buy my game when it's done. You've seen it made. So it kind of ends up being the things that I've seen from the streamer's end. And then what I want to look at now is why do you watch? And kind of understand maybe the similarities and the differences that we get from that.
Yeah, you nailed the top three reasons for me, which were accountability, sort of staying sane with the social aspect, and then yes, marketing the game. Um, Timeline wise, you mentioned spring of 2025 for completing your PhD, which I recognize there's probably some fuzziness there, and I don't know how many back and forths there can be, but that is roughly, let's say, 6 months from now. And you're focusing on this viewer aspect. I see your face changing already. So is this a time crunch? Because this sounds like a lot of work to do, maybe for.
So yeah, so I've actually been trying to get participants for this research since January.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it kind of boils down to that getting access to communities and also getting over my own fears of reaching out, right? Because the live streaming software development community is small. So if I make one mistake and somehow someone takes me as a airhead or butt face, that could just ruin everything, and
Yeah.
I may not you know may not be able to get participants, which kind of sucks. But no, I think I believe that I could do it. Like really, the only thing, so finishing up getting participants
Mm-hmm.
for my viewer study is, as long as I can get I have a number, um, I could do that data analysis and write up the results between like now and Christmas.
Yeah.
I have all the background ready, motivations, research. I have all my research questions because you have to have all of that before you do the study, because
Yeah.
you would then be gathering data with no research question and going. I've done that, and trying to figure out the research question from the data you have, no go.
Very tough.
And then the other part of my dissertation is actually getting my students to live stream. And
Oh.
I'm collecting that data now. That'll be done in December. I take Christmas off because that's when my birthday is. Like, there's no one needs to work over holidays on your birthday. It's
Mm-hmm.
a hard stop for me. And then I get about 3 to 4 months to probably wrap that up, possibly run it again. So it is a time crunch. I know it's possible. It's if I can, hold myself accountable to get it done.
Well, it doesn't sound like it's just that. And this is where I'm going to talk to you, the audience. And if you're watching this on YouTube in the next maybe month or so, Ella has shared a link to her survey on my Discord. I'll probably end up putting this in the YouTube video as well. It would greatly help her out if you could go take that survey. That is maybe you said 10 to 15 minutes, right? Oh, sorry, Ella.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. That was like a 10 to 15 minute time investment on the survey.
Yeah,
but
yeah. So about 10 to 15 on the survey, and then for interviews, if you want to do an interview, I try to do a 30-minute to 45-minute time block.
And do you?
Sorry, I started reading chat, and I was like, wait, I shouldn't do that.
That's okay. Did you get your target number of interviews? Do you mostly need survey participants? Do you mostly need interviewees, or both?
I still need both. I am approaching some pretty good survey numbers, but the more surveys the better, because that tends to be like where you get your like data saturation, right? That you can say, I've gotten this many surveys, I may only have 5 or 6 interviews, but if these 50 to 60 surveys say exactly what these interviews are saying, you can kind of match your point.
Yeah, I see. Okay, cool. Well, again, audience, don't forget to participate. I wanted to ask you about something, and I'm going to read this quote because I think I pulled this from the document you shared with me. But you mentioned that participating in the research could potentially, and I'm quoting here, help build an argument that live streaming could be used as an educational tool. So in my mind, without a doubt, it can be used as it. But what I wanted to sort of find out is, what is the thought of using it as a tool? Is it more incidental, as in, hey, these people happen to be streaming, so now students can go find them? Or is it more intentional, like we should get more people streaming? What's the thought process after sort of proving that it's a tool?
So for me right now, it's kind of both, right? I learn best not in a classroom, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I can go and I could watch someone spell it out for me, and I'm not having to like be like, oh man, is anyone like seeing me struggle here? I think that we need to like advertise tools like live streaming as like, hey, this is just as good,
Mm.
maybe if not better, than watching an hour-long YouTube video about maybe something sort of related. You can gather so much more information passively from someone who's moderate to even an expert live streaming, right? You may not necessarily see that at the time, but I believe, and at least from what other streamers believe, um, that you can end up growing even by like watching these things and finding interests and gaining access to these communities who have the same interests as you, right? And then on the flip side of that, I believe that we need to have students learn informally more,
Hmm.
right? We don't give students the opportunity to say, do a project, there's no rubric. Because that's what you do when you go into industry, right? Like, you have to figure out the problem. You have to be able to articulate your ideas, your thought process behind it, and you don't get a chance to really practice that in college. And that's skills you learn through informal opportunities. And so I want to give students that opportunity. And I think the best way to possibly do that is through live streaming. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. So far, I think kind of what I've seen. My students have been really open and responsive um, to their time live streaming. So.
Yeah. I, Going back a step to the, someone could be sort of moderate to possibly an expert if they're live streaming and there could still be value for the viewers. I've had people come in and comment on, practically everything. I'm doing this very publicly. So they'll comment on things from how I organize my thoughts to what tools I'm using to how I'm using those tools to then the actual programming, design patterns, etc. And there are people who even recently have said things like, I did not know this was possible on Windows or in VS Code. And had I not been watching, I wouldn't have known that. This is something that I feel like the only other way you'd probably get that experience, unless you stumbled on it, you were online and someone was like, hey, here's a hotkey you might not have known about, as if you're looking over someone's shoulder in real life. Maybe you're at work with them and you're like, well, what did you just do there? And you're probably less likely to think I should ask this question while you're looking over their shoulder. So yeah, there is a lot that I think can come from the live streaming aspect. You mentioned you wanted to approach it from both sides though, not just viewership. How do you approach it from the getting more people to stream? You said you're doing this with your students right now. How has that been going?
So last week was their first stream. They were all pretty excited about it actually. A couple people ended up like telling their friends like, "Hey, can you just come give me some viewers like so I don't feel so lonely?" And they ended up having like a great conversation. So we'll see how this semester goes. I've actually made some changes at my class based on last semester.
Hmm.
Last semester was a bit of a dumpster fire. And I take 100% responsibility for that. This is my first class I've ever designed,
Hmm.
and I was like, okay, typically in an undergraduate context, 1 credit hour means 3 hours of work.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, if you're taking this because it's a variable hour credit elective, 1 hour, 3 hours of streaming. If you take it for three, you're streaming 9 hours a week. And I was like, you can do this whenever. If you want to stream 9 hours, 1 a.m. to 8, 9, 8, 10 a.m., go for it. If you want to break it up, go for it. And that ended up being too much for them, right? Especially for students who had never streamed before. And so I've made some changes to be like, all right, it's 1 to like 1.5 to 2.
Yeah.
Um, so it's interesting because I also have someone this semester who is a repeat. So I'm going to be really looking at them to see like, hey, have these changes, have these changes stuck, and how have you grown?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because obviously they're taking the class again. I didn't mess up too much.
No. Yeah. And I think you should give yourself some credit for that. I was laughing because I was just picturing someone who's taking 12 credit hours, which they probably can't even go up to that much. And you say, all right, full-time streaming, go be a student.
Yeah, no, that would be unethical.
Well, yeah. Also, I don't think you'd ever ask for that sort of thing. But from my perspective, streaming is something that does take energy, and even if you like it, it's still something you need to sort of be on for. There's a
100%.
personality input that goes into it almost, and then of course while you're programming, there is the difficulty of just thinking through the problems you're trying to solve. I do want to, I'm going to start like kind of pivoting around a bit here because I want to make sure I
Mhm.
touch on some of these topics that I think will be pretty interesting. One
Yeah.
is trends in streaming. Have you analyzed viewership and stream numbers over the years and how they've been changing?
I actually haven't. So if you have your own experience with that, that would be really interesting to hear about. Because I mean, I feel like there has been more viewership since that software and technology to the software and game development category. I think
Hmm.
that's definitely helped a lot. That's been about 2 years, I think.
I don't
But yeah,
recall.
I mean,
I was on break for a little bit during that time, but yeah.
gotcha. Yeah, if you have like a personal anecdote about that, I'd actually be interested to like if you're how your stream's grown, if you've seen changes like that.
Yeah, sure. I'll give you a brief answer to that now. So I've been streaming since roughly 2015. There was, I would say, pretty steady growth up until about maybe somewhere between 100 and 200 average viewers at any given time. And then I think it sort of topped off there. And I attribute this to Twitch not being the best platform for discovery. Because if you look at science and tech right now, it, maybe there are about 5,000 viewers. I don't know. We could actually pull it up and find out. But at its peak, it's because of one or two outliers who don't necessarily put those people back into the channel. So then they just, sort of evaporate into the Twitch ecosystem. And I don't think there's an incentive for Twitch to do this, given that most people have the same point of view you had originally, which is why would people watch someone code? Why wouldn't I go watch a 212 KD ratio, no mercy main and Overwatch? So,
Yeah.
uh, I was going to say, oh yeah, the people who've had success have pulled in people from other platforms. The people who've gone, beyond 1,000 concurrent viewers typically,
Mhm.
and I don't think the category is going to naturally grow. That's sort of my view on this. But
Yeah.
what I was going to ask as a result of this is, how do you think that would impact education if, let's say, the category never got bigger?
I don't know if it necessarily would, because I think it still takes a certain type of learner to engage and enjoy these types of streams,
Mhm.
anyways. And I don't know if that is every person who's interested in computer science or game development or software development. I could see it potentially growing a smidgy bit, but I don't think overall it will, at least for a viewership perspective, I don't think it would, it won't put it above, you know, I don't know, League of Legends.
Yeah.
I mean, how are many people watching League of Legends right now? And there is something like I kind of, it's always in the back of my mind that I don't necessarily have the answer to, but I do think about it. And someone might ask like, well, if you're gonna tell people to stream, it's going to water down this category. And for some reason, the person that asks me that in my head is just really like putting the knife in my gut and twisting because I don't actually have an answer to that. I don't think it would be bad because it would just make a bigger pool of people to engage with, right? The more people there are in a category, the more likely you'll find viewership and community that is closer to you and matters to you.
Yeah.
Is how I would take that because when you start to get to these streams that are, you know, I mean, even at 100 people, I could see that being close to unmanageable, right? If you have 500, 1,000, 2,000 people in your streams, with someone like how Pirate Software does, or what's that guy that works for Netflix?
Primogen.
Yeah, that guy.
Yeah.
Um, at what it changes the tone of the community, right?
It
It's
does. And this brings us to a very important point, which I think is at the crux of software development streaming. When you are a gaming streamer, maybe you have some goal of completing the game, but in general, I think probably most gaming streamers' goals are to be entertained for some time and entertain their audience. And that's it. So if they want to say, you know what, I put my keyboard aside, I put my mouse aside, and I'm just going to talk to you for the next 2 hours. If that gets viewership, then they're probably happy and their needs are met. In software development streams, I feel like there's this constant battle between productivity and interactivity. And yeah, if I'm chatting, I'm not only not working, but I'm also context switched into chat mode such that I'm working at a lower efficiency level. And I think that's why I've seen this trend a little bit. If you have more than 1,000 viewers and you're working on a software project, you're probably not really working as hard as someone with 10 viewers, let's say. So yeah, there is that inflection point that I think makes it tough.
Yeah.
Anyway, other trends I wanted to talk about here were, do you see trends like VTubers or co-working? Do you see that impacting the education space at all?
In the education space, I don't think so.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the co-working. I haven't actually really studied any co. I want to. That's actually something that I want to do a mm, ethnography kind of study on. Like I kind of want to start doing that, but that requires me to do have more time than I need. Um, but I think not in the educational space, but in the social and community space, that people there is some like new research coming out that people who use like VTuber avatars or other non your human skin avatars are actually end up being more confident when they stream,
Yeah.
which means that they may end up learning more because they're putting time into streaming. They're putting time and effort into this practice that they're doing, all because they are able to do it through this different persona. So I think that will definitely be something very interesting going forward. But I personally haven't done any actual research on VTube and those like online VTuber personas. But I think it's a definitely interesting space to look
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
toward.
I think just push your PhD completion date to 2028, and then you can finish that and we can get all this research. About being more
Perfect.
confident, it's funny because one of the problems that I think really honestly everybody probably struggles with, but especially in computer science, is imposter syndrome. And if you can, just by having a virtual avatar, present yourself to the world instead of yourself, then that's a way to sort of slice through that imposter syndrome. So it sounds like that's a nice little pro tip.
Everyone get a VTuber avatar. Yep.
Yep.
If that's the solution to imposter syndrome, hold on. I'll go pull a Fiverr right now and
No, really,
get me an avatar made.
I
I say that jokingly.
I know. Well, and there's a streamer that I watch who is a VTuber and said, I am not this talkative in real life. And so people who do watch the stream who know me in real life are like, what has gotten into you? And yet I've also heard that from someone who is not on the VTuber side of things, who said, I'm more confident on stream, even without being behind a obfuscation layer of an avatar. So it's just an interesting phenomenon in general. Let's see. I want to give you time to ask me questions, but I wanted to see what is the most important. Oh yeah, I have a crazy idea. So have you heard of Watch Me Forever?
No.
Okay, it is.
I'll make a note about that too.
It's a Seinfeld-esque stream that is fully AI generated. So it's got animations and there are characters, and the AI is set to like set up for jokes and then have a punchline and then like change camera angles and stuff. I was curious, how would you feel about a CS version of that, where it was a Watch Me Forever style stream? It's on 24/7, and there's someone who's quote unquote coding in Rust, but they don't have that productivity and interactivity problem because they're an AI. So they're not only seamlessly interacting with chat, but they're also getting things done and answering questions on their code and whatever else.
I think I may have to push my PhD to 2028 because wow, I don't. That's a wild concept. So it's you're personifying AI in ways to make it, you know, uh, personable. You're adding an education component, and it's live, so you can watch it whenever from whatever time zone. Oh,
So,
my mind.
well, and I'm a little worried that I just gave away some like $1 billion idea here that I'm, freely just sharing with the world. But honestly, I do think
Copyright.
it's got a lot of interest behind it, in that, yeah, it solves a problem that a human basically cannot. We can't context switch and also say two different things at once, right? We can't operate at that
Yeah.
level.
You can't. You really. I mean, even with superstar rock star mods to be able to, answer the easy questions, or commands and in chat to be able to answer questions for you. There's always going to be people that come in and be like, but I actually don't understand, and this didn't explain it to me. And then, as the streamer, you want them to not be confused or
Yeah.
or misguided in certain ways. Um, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, just a
That's
crazy
a
idea.
wild concept.
Yeah. I've got a couple of little transitionary questions, and then we can get into any questions you might have for me, or I've got plenty
Yeah.
more for you. But I want to ask you, what's the next step for you? So summer 2025, let's say even things get pushed, maybe it's fall 2025. Are you going to stay in education? Are you going to go to the industry again? You're going to become a pro Magic the Gathering player?
I'm going to start F1 school. No, I really. So I'm kind of at that point where I am over academia again, right? Um, but I do love the educational space. So trying to find that sweet spot of maybe industry while still being educational related, this kind of like instructional design kind of space, I think is where I think my sweet spot is for right now. Because also just on a, like as a personal thing, my interests change about every 5 to 6 years,
Yeah.
and I'm at that 5 to 6 year mark.
Yep.
So it's like I could be doing anything next fall, but I think if I stick to my guns, I would love to be in the industry, but still, giving trainings or producing trainings for people. Or if somehow Twitch wants to hire me and we can build out Twitch education, hit me up. My email's on my website.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I was gonna say streaming is a good way of keeping that going. And you stream already, but what you do is largely gaming, crafts, Lego. Have you thought of streaming
Unrelated to my
yourself?
research.
What was that? Yeah,
Sorry.
unrelated to research. But have you thought of streaming yourself working on a coding project?
I have, and then I ended up being the thing that I research, right? I'm too I end up being nervous. I feel this imposter syndrome. People watching me code is just we're gonna get an argument over tabs versus spaces, and then I'm gonna
Mm.
cry on stream.
Well, your virtual avatar
uh,
won't be crying though. It will be exuding an air of
what?
confidence as you're doing this. It's because that's the secret. Uh, I know what you mean, and I've seen this because people have asked me over the years too. How do I get started with streaming? And I say, look, the very basics are just have a computer powerful enough and turn on your stream. That's it. You
Just
don't
do
need
it.
a mic. You don't need a camera. But in general, it is overcoming that barrier of, oh, people are going to be judging me. What do I do about people stealing my code? What am I even building? What if I get bored? What if I? So yeah, there is quite a lot going on there. Um, I want to give you a chance to ask me questions because we talked about this ahead of time, and I know you said it wasn't super high priority, and that if we skipped it entirely, but I think we've got
Yeah.
about like 9-10 minutes.
Okay. Well, so if you want me to ask you one question, if you have other questions that you want to go to, one thing that I'd be really interested in is what would you change about your streams if you had infinite time or money?
So for me, I have produced thousands of hours of content at this point, and one thing that's nice about having produced that content is it's all available on YouTube and Twitch still. You could go watch it, but no one's really going to go watch it. There were a few people who, while I was on my break going to work for the industry again, they maybe played some of the videos from that playlist, had them on in the background. What I think would be really nice is if I could somehow get editors or people somehow to transform some of that content into, hey, here's what Adam learned for that 1 month of tackling this system or doing that. I think that would be great. And I think other things would just be like little professional polish things that I could do for the stream. I try to keep everything very minimalistic. It's usually just my screen, me, and a keyboard camera, and that's it. But it would still be nice to have, better transitions or to have more automation. But in general, I think it would be that the content I produce gets used for longer than just the 8 hours that I was streaming for. I think that'd be the biggest change.
Yeah. No, that I think that ends up being something that you could also then use to then it might end up growing your stream, right? Because you can then break it down into smaller pieces. You can offer that as like, hey, I see you have questions about this in chat right now. I have a whole 30-hour course broken down by, you know, every topic you need to know. Here you go. And then come back and let me know how it went. Yeah, no, I think that's infinite time, right?
Infinite time, yeah, and resources.
Do you want me to pass it back to you? Do you want to like do a little back and forth with questions? Does
I
that?
wanted you to have the time to ask because a lot of the things I have remaining were like large topics that even at this point I don't think we'd be able to kind of cover in totality. So yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. Next one would be, so this is gonna be, what's been your biggest challenge coming back to streaming? And I believe you've been a full-time streamer now since the end of 2023, right?
Yeah.
So like what's been your biggest challenge to overcome for that?
So honestly, the biggest challenge is maybe a bit of a surprise. For those who don't know, I worked at Google for 3 years prior to coming back to streaming. And whenever you leave something with a lot of structure for something that exercises your own agency, choosing something off the beaten path, you always wonder, am I making a gigantic mistake? So there's that identity crisis that happened for a few months of this was my sort of dream. This is what I was longing to do. This is why I left Google. And then I got there and I was like, am I making the most of this? Am I somehow leaving something on the table? Should I be at 100% happiness every single day? And if I'm not, does that represent a problem? So I think that was the biggest difficulty. As far as the streaming landscape itself, I would say Twitch hasn't really changed a whole lot. There's some new features, there's some new memes, but other than that, it's still the same. Like you talk into camera, they talk back at you via chat. So yeah, I think the hardest thing was the identity crisis of having left a structured world with certainty.
Yeah. And then it's like you yourself could be your own structure, but I feel like as humans we're naturally chaotic. So forming that structure within yourself is very difficult. Like I've seen kind of the same thing like going into a PhD program. Once you're done with your classes, you don't have your PhD. Like you have to do the research component now,
Yep.
and you know that's on you. No one makes a timeline for that.
It is. And when we talk about off the beaten path, I was looking up stats on PhDs, and I think it's roughly 10% of people with degrees have PhDs. So it's like one out of every 10 people is not a norm thing. It is not hey, every other person you meet has this. It's somewhat rare. It's like left-handed
Yeah,
people. So
yeah, but there might be more left-handed people than PhDs, and I think that number is actually slightly stagnant or even declining. Like less people are going for that higher, at least the PhD level. There might be more master's enrollment just because of that kind of you have to have a master's to go forward kind of thing.
yeah.
But yeah, okay, so next question. What's been the most impactful thing that's happened as part of your like educational end game streaming? This could be like an instance of something or just like as overall.
Okay, so the first thing that came to mind as most impactful was a very touching moment. A community member named Every Juan years ago had put together a community collage of just appreciation for the years that I'd been streaming and working on the game that I was working on at the time called Botland. And that holds a special place in my heart and probably always will. But when I hear impactful, I always think, okay, what impacted the stream or what impacted maybe viewership numbers or impressions? Um, I think of it as the social networking effect of meeting other streamers. And for me, again, it's maybe a little weird, but it's whenever I have interacted with someone outside of the software and game development space. So as a random example, I watched a lot of StarCraft 2 way back when. And every once in a while I would raid people who were streaming StarCraft 2, and it was a mismatch of communities because people who are watching me code aren't going to go watch an RTS game necessarily. And yet some of those people, we sort of became friends for some time. And maybe every once in a while, a gaming streamer would raid me. And I always felt like, this feels like I've made some sort of crossroads or an in with a different category or set of people. So yeah, I think those two things are what I feel are sort of the most impactful. Nothing else is necessarily coming to mind, but perhaps it was the open-endedness of the question. So if you do have any follow-up, feel free.
No,
Yeah.
no, that's great. I think that is a great part of the platform, right? You can end up having your like orcs and fairies and your humans over here all come into one place. We're making a D&D meme here, I guess. Uh, they can all come to that crossroads, and it is so likely that there is going to be overlap between those things. And I think that is something that really makes this platform also kind of special is when you can kind of take you can shuffle from this side of the realm to another side and there will be overlap.
Yeah.
I think that's it for me. Those are just kind of my burning questions,
No,
so
that's good. And thank you. And I hope you didn't feel you were put on the spot at all because
Well, that's
I
pretty
did
good.
have plenty. Okay, so I want to leave people with a couple of things. One is don't forget to participate in Ella's survey and possibly interview if you have the time. But the survey is certainly the easier one and should not take you very long, and that's on Discord. And we'll probably type it in a Twitch chat in just a second. The second thing is, do you want to talk about your Twitch channel because you mentioned that you'd like to get the word out there?
Yeah. I also have my own Twitch channel. It keeps me sane. I do a lot of Lego streams, crafting, roguelike, card-like deck building, any of those kind of. If it has cards in it, I'm gonna play it. Um, I do sometimes end up talking about my research, and I actually would really like to start looking at the creative space as well. I think there's going to be end up a lot of overlap of the same, accountability, learning as watching someone does stuff. So if I could start my own ethnographic study with that too, that would be really cool. And
Yeah,
then like researching yourself, and
yeah.
you are now the fishbowl.
On the
So,
creative side, I was looking through your VODs, and I think you were making a possum out of, I want to say tufting. I'm not totally sure. And you
it
didn't
was
seem super happy with it, but it looked good to me.
the instructions were so poorly written. The photos of it were poor, and I'm it was needle felting with wool. And I'm just like, I don't think this is gonna look like a possum at the end of it. I still have to finish that, so
Okay,
we'll
okay.
see how he turns out. It's just like it's the shape of his body right now that's just a little rat like and less cute, chunky possum like.
Well, I'm sure
So
you'll get there. I have one request for you before you like leave for the day, which is could you share the link to your Twitch stream and then also the link to your survey directly in Twitch chat, and yeah, that way people can access it easily. But other
yeah.
than that, thank you very much for being here for the interview. And yeah, I had a good time. I hope you enjoy the rest of pumpkin spice season.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having me on here. Thanks for giving. Thanks for making it opposite. Usually, I'm the one doing this, so this is very cool to be on the interviewee side.
Yeah, it was
I
fun to learn
really
about
enjoyed
what you're doing.
this.
Yeah. All right. Well, take
All
care,
right.
Ella. Have a good rest of your Friday.
Yes.
Yep.
Thanks. You too.
Bye. See ya.
Bye.